Hi, Merry Christmas everyone. Today's video is a little present from me to you, and I'm going to show you lots of techniques in this video that you haven't seen before on my videos. So I'm going to show you a little bit of quilting, I'm going to show you some applique, and I'm going to finish it off with the binding. So in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make a placemat for Christmas. It is this one, it is Noel. So, I hope you enjoy it. Let's get quilting. The first thing I've done is I've cut out the background fabric for the placemat. So I have got this cream fabric and it measures 10.5 inches in one direction and 8 inches in the other direction. So I just took my width of fabric from the bolt and I cut 8 inches off it and then cut that in half and then half again. So out of one 8-inch strip I've got 4 background pieces here for 4 placemats. And then I've taken my stripy fabric and I've cut an inch strip. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew, first of all I'm going to sew the long edges on with the sewing machine, and then I'll do the side pieces. So we'll go over to the sewing machine and have a look at that. So I'm at the sewing machine and I've placed the 2 fabrics together, right sides together, and I'm going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam. So that's the first side done, and now I need to do the other side. So I'm just going to really carefully lay the 2 pieces together, making sure that the edges line up nicely. Okay, so that's so nicely in place. I'm going to take it back over to the ironing board. So I'm back over ready to iron these. So I just flip this over and pop my iron back on. The first thing I'm going to do is set the seams. And then I'm going to iron the seams towards the stripy fabric. Now I'm just going to trim those edges. Then I'm just going to flip that back over onto the ironing board. Put a pin to keep it in place whilst I take it back over to the sewing machine. So back at the ironing board, I am going to set those seams again. And I'm going to press the seams towards the stripy fabric. And now we need to trim those edges. So I'm going to get my ruler, going to line it up with the edge of the stripy fabric, and I'm also going to make sure that the seam lines up neatly as well. So the seam should really be at 3/4 of an inch away from the edge of the stripy fabric. So as well as cutting off these tails here, I'm just going to trim the full length. So only a tiny sliver came off that, and I'm going to do the same on the other side. So that is my first border around the placemat, and now I want to add a green border. So I'm going to use this green fabric here, and I'm going to need to cut some strips of that. So this piece, the stripy fabric, was cut at 1 inch. So once the seam allowances have come off, that's going to finish at a 1/2 inch. So this green fabric I want to finish at 1 inch, so I'm going to cut strips that are 1.5 inches wide. So the placemat now measures just a bit over 11.5 inches. So I'm going to cut two strips from the green fabric that measure, I think, probably just a bit over 12 inches. 12 inches feels a bit too small, so I'll probably cut them 12.5 inches. This is my short piece, and I'm going to cut this to 12.5 inches. This is the first strip, just lining all of that up, and cut that 12.5, and then I'll cut another piece at 12.5. So these are now going to be sewn on. Move all of this out of the way, and you can see I'm going to sew these onto the long edges of the placemat. So this time I have pinned the border in place, and again I'm going to sew this with a 1/4 inch seam. So this now needs to go back over to the ironing board. Okay, so we're going to set the seams and press the seams towards the final border fabric, in this case the green fabric. So now those tails need to be trimmed. I'm going to line the ruler up with I'm going to line a seam with one of these lines on the ruler to make sure that that is 3/4 of an inch away, and then I'm going to cut the tails and any little sliver of fabric from the side there, and repeat on the other side. I do often find I veer off slightly at the end here, so I'm just going to fix that. Okay, so we're now ready to add the side pieces on. So I'm going to measure that. It measures 11 inches. So I think if we cut the side pieces at 11.5, that will be long enough. So what have I got left on this green fabric? I'm going to fold that in half and see, actually I just need to cut the selvage off. It's difficult to see the selvedge. Turn it around so I can see the wrong side. So I'm going to fold this in half. Fingers crossed I've got enough to cut the 11.5 inches out of that. Yeah, I do. So I might be a bit more generous. I'm going to cut 11 3/4 out there. And so these pieces now need to go right sides together. And I'm going to pin them in place. So making sure that I've got spare either side. Just grab my pins. Pop this one in the centre. And then I'm going to pop this at the edge, smoothing it out and making sure it's all lined up. And I'll repeat that on the opposite side. So now I've pinned the side on and I'm going to sew again with a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm now going to take that over to the ironing board and press the seams. So I've pressed the top of the placemat now, but I haven't cut it to size. I'm going to do the quilting on it first. So with the quilting, I have cut out a piece of wadding and also a piece of backing, and they measure 12 inches by 15 inches. So I've just placed the backing fabric onto the wadding and smoothed it out. I do like doing small projects like this because it's so easy to work with the wadding. So I flipped that over now and I'm going to place the placemat top on top of the wadding, creating a sandwich of top, wadding and backing. And what I'm going to do now is I've decided to do some crisscrosses across quilted lines in a crisscross fashion over the top. So I'm going to have these at 45-degree angles. So I've laid my ruler down here and I've laid the 45-degree line on the ruler along the inner border stitch line, and with my hero marker I'm going to make a kind of an indentation in the quilt top. I could bring the ruler right down to that corner piece there, but it's not square, so obviously it's not going to go there, so I'm deliberately going slightly off there and I'm going to score my first mark. So you may be able to see that on the video, and then I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch away from this line. So I'm just going to swizzle this round so that I can see it better. So that's where the line is, and now I'm just going to score another line, and I'm going to do that again. So that's where the inch is there, and then so I'm just going to keep on going. When I go over to the sewing machine, I am going to use my guides on my sewing machine, so they'll be set at 1 inch. So that's another way to kind of make sure you're getting it right. So I'm just going to continue scoring this before I start pinning it together. My ruler's not quite long enough. I'm not going to get too worried about that. So this is only leaving a crease in your quilt top, which I much prefer than scoring it with a pen, which doesn't always come out, I found. So as long as I can see this when I take it over to the sewing machine, then I much prefer this method. So that's that in one direction. Actually, I think that is nice just on its own. So I'm not going to go the other direction because I think that is going to be plenty of quilting. So now I'm going to get my curved safety pins and I'm going to pin it. I'm going to start in the centre. I'm going to try and keep away from those markings, but I'm not going to. If I have to move my safety pin when I'm over at the sewing machine, I will. And I'm just going to smooth the fabric out as I pin the next one in, just to make sure that all the wrinkles go out to the side. You don't need many on something this size. There we go, that's ready to go over to the sewing machine. The beauty of something as small as this is I'm not going to have to worry about my quilting ends. So I'm just going to start at one end and go through to the other end and then cut them off. Don't need to worry about tying off the knots or anything like that because it will all be hidden and sewn together in the binding. So I'm going to sew along the lines here, and I've got the walking foot on, and it's an open toe foot so that I can see those lines that I scored onto the fabric. And I've got my seam guide here, and that's set 1 inch away from the needle. So I've taken out one of the pins and see how I go. I might need to take out this other pin, but I'm going to sew the first line now. So that's the first line in place. It's pretty straight, I'm quite pleased with that. So as I said, we've got this 1 inch line here. Just take away some things that don't need to be inside the sewing machine. And I'm now going to line that up with the line of stitching I've just done, which is more visible than the line I scored, but I can see both. Okay, it is a metallic thread I'm using, and it's just stopped, so I've got to fix that now. It's obviously unthreaded itself, which is a bit of a nuisance because it's halfway along my placemat. So I'm just going to pause the video whilst I sort out this problem. I may have to unpick that stitching because I don't want to have a join in the center of that. Okay, so I have rethreaded the machine and I have unpicked that line of stitching, so I'm going to give it another go. Fingers crossed that it's going to behave itself, otherwise I am going to regret using the metallic thread. I did look for a metallic needle in my collection of needles, but I don't have one, so fingers crossed. I'm going to keep going. So it has just unthreaded itself again. I think this is going to be quite a long process, so once I've finished it I will show you what it looks like. So the metallic thread did keep breaking when I was sewing with it. I think I would have done better if I'd had a metallic needle in my sewing machine. So I unpicked it all and started again with a different type of thread. It's a... oh, here it is. Came out of this box, which is some Madeira threads, and they are rayon, viscose filament. Don't know if you can see that. I'll put that there. So that's what I used in the end. They do have a, as you can see, a nice shininess to them. So I used one of the threads in there. So just going to give this a quick press now. And the next thing we're going to do, I need to get the applique pieces ready to go onto the top of this placemat. So I use Heat and Bond as my fusible adhesive, but you can use anything you want. You can use Bond or Web or any of the others. So I just have this, which I'm going to use. I'm going to cut a bit off. So hopefully that's going to be enough. So I've got my light box here, and I've got my design here, which is going to spell, you might be able to see that, Noel. So in order for me to do this, I need to trace those letters onto my fusible web. And they need to be traced on backward, mirror, so that when you flip it over, you've got the N and the E and the L going in the right direction. So you don't need to draw onto the paper side of the fusible web. Grab a pencil, and I'm going to do this now. Okay, so that's the first one. And leave a bit of a space between them all, because I want, when I cut them out, I'm not going to cut them out on the line. I'm going to kind of cut roughly around them. You may think I'm not being very precise with this, and obviously my circle is not the perfect circle, but I find that you get more precise when you're cutting the fabric out, so I don't worry too much about it at this stage. Right, I think I'll best do the L this way in order to fit them all on. Just checking that I have actually done that N the wrong way around, and I have. And I'll just do the E. The light switch is just where I rest my arm, and it keeps turning off but I should really put the switch on the opposite corner, but the power cable doesn't stretch far enough for that. Okay, so I'll put that to one side, and I've now got my lettering on the fusible web, and I've just remembered the other thing I want to do is cut out some leaves. So I've got these tiny leaves here, and when I was designing it I cut them to size, so I need to cut these out. So I'm going to see how much fusible web I've got left from this scrap. I'll probably have to cut another bit for those. So let's cut these up. So I might be able to get one out of there. Let's see if these are big enough. Now obviously I want these, oops, he's gone off again, turn back on. I want there to be some space around these when I come to cut them out. So I'm just going to trace these. Okay, that's one, and let's do the other one. Is it going to fit in this space? That's really quite tight, but I'm going to go with it. There we go. So we're now finished with the light box. I'll put this to one side. I'm going to bring the ironing board back. So I've chosen these red fabrics in which to use for the lettering for Noel. So I'm just going to give them a quick press, and then we'll fuse the bond web onto them. So I think I'm going to use this particular one with the different colours in it for the E, and then the others for the other letters. So I'm probably going to do it, so N-O-E-L. So let's grab the N first. There's the N, that's the fabric that I want to use for the N. So obviously we want the red showing when we're finished. So what we're going to do is we're going to fuse this fusible web onto the wrong side of the fabric that you're going to use. And it's the sticky, the bobbly part of, it's not sticky actually, it's just bobbly, rough on one side. That's where the glue is, and we're going to melt the glue onto the fabric. Now I don't want to use up lots of fabric, so I'm just going to cut a little bit more of this web off the back. Not to the lines though, I'm going to leave that for when it's stuck on. So here we go. Now when you're going to do this, you need to hold the iron down for about 6 seconds. But don't move the iron, it just has to be held in place. So that has now stuck onto there. Oh, it's quite hot. Remember, it is quite hot. And now we're going to cut it out. If you lift it up and you think, oh, that's not very stuck on there, you could just do it again. I might do a little bit more. There we go. So remember, it is a bit hot initially. Let that cool down. And now I'm going to cut it out. And this is where you can get a little bit more accurate with your cutting than with your drawing. swirly bit there is really quite tricky. I have to try and find my smaller scissors for that. Alright, let's see if I can find my smaller scissors. There we go, some small scissors. I'm just going to cut this down. Right, might be easier to move this around now. So I'm going to go back down here. This bit is really tricky. Okay, so I can see there that it's all come off and it wasn't very sticky. I'm just going to press that again. There we go. So that is the N. So here's the placemat, and now I'm going to play around with where I want all these letters to go. So I think that is how I would like it to appear, and I think I'm going to start with the O first, because to be fair, that's going to be the easiest thing to applique on. So I'm going to remove everything except for the O, and that's where I want my O. So I'm going to take the fusible backing away from the back of it. Sometimes easier said than done. There we go. So I think it was there, but I always doubt myself, so I'm just going to put these letters back on again and see if that's where I want it to be. I think that's how I wanted it. Leaving that in place, going to remove the other letters, and now I'm going to place the iron on top of that to stick it to the top of the placemat. So held that down for about 10 seconds, and I'm happy that that's in place now. So I'm going to take that over to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch it in place. So I've chosen the stitch I'm going to use. It's the one on the bottom. It's blanket stitch, and it's a bit thicker than the one on the top. So again, I've left the walking foot on, and I've left the open toe foot on the walking foot, but I have removed the side bars. So we're going to start the applique. So I'm going to lower the foot down and just pop the needle in on the edge there, and it's quite slow. I'm just going to go around the circle. Now I'm coming back to where I started, so I'm just going to take this tail out of the way, and I will stitch over where I started to secure that end, and then I'll probably do a stopping stitch. So now I'm going to select a locking stitch. I have my pointer for this. I can never remember where they are actually. Right, well, as I can't find the locking stitch, I have to look up in the manual. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to have some tails. So I need to lift this up, and I'm just going to I'll cut these threads quite long, and then what I'll do is I'll take them through to the back and I will pop the knot. So I'll show you how to do that. So I need to pop that knot to secure those tails. So this short piece is secure because I sewed over the top of it, so I'm just going to cut that now down to there. And this thread I want to bring to the back onto the reverse. So I'll go back over to the wrong side of the quilt, and I'm going to just pull out a needle. So I use, I think they're easy thread needles, and I will show you a picture of these, but don't have the traditional eye. They've got like a hook thing. But initially what I want to do is pull that red thread back. So I'm going to just gently move this gold thread, which is my backing thread, so I can see the loop of that red thread, and then I'm going to pull it through. Hopefully that will come through nicely. Yep, doesn't seem to want to do it too nicely. I think that came through. Just check on the other side. Yep, so that thread has come through. So now I've got both my top thread and my bottom thread over here. So I'm going to hold them together, and I want to make a knot quite close to the stitching. So I'm joining both these threads together and making the knot quite close there. Now with this needle, I'm going to pop both threads over the slot, and now that's threaded. And then to pop the knot, I'm just going to go into the back of near the stitching. I'm going to run the needle in between the wadding and the backing fabric, and I'm going to pull. Now as I pull, that knot should pop through. I heard that pop through, so just going to pull the ends out, and now I can cut this thread really close here, so you won't be able to see it. So that is popping the knot and securing your ends. So my O is in place, and now we need to put the other letters on. So I'm going to put all the letters back on in place to work out where I want to sew the next letter. So I think it was like that. Just going to go back and check the picture again. That's that. I think I'm going to do the E next. I am probably going to leave that end to the end because it looks like the trickiest one to do. I'll take the L. I might just leave them in place because I need to take that backing off the E. There we go, removed that. And now this is ready to be pressed into place. Yeah, I think that's where I wanted it. Just make sure that it's quite level, and then we're going to press that in place. There we go. So we're going to go back over to the sewing machine and stitch that into place. Okay, so we're back at the sewing machine. Slightly trickier letter to stitch into place. So here we go. Now with the curves you can ease round them, but when you come to a right angle you're going to have to stop and pivot. So I need to judge where I'm going to stop the needle. So I'm going to put the needle in the down position, and then I'm just going to pivot round. And fingers crossed we're going to go forward, not backwards, because that's annoying when that happens. So let's go. Yep, that worked. So coming up to another right angle. So just pivot. Really hoping that it's going to stay on the fabric and not come onto the placemat. Okay, let's go. Yeah, good. This isn't as right angle as before, so this is just a little bit more easing round. So this needle is now in the process of going forwards and backwards. So I'm going to let it go on a little bit more. And now it's swinging. So I'll let it swing once and let it come back. Now I'm going to lower it, and now I'm going to pivot round. I don't know whether it's going to work. Fingers crossed it's going to work. Wasn't perfect, but right, I have no idea where it's going to go this time. So let's see. It did go a little bit wide there, but hopefully it's not too bad. Okay, so I've come back to the beginning, I've gone over where we started, and now we're going to cut these threads long. So I'm just going to trim this short end, and then, like I did before, I'm going to pull that long top thread through to the bottom. So just going to pull a little bit on this bottom thread to find the loop of the top thread, and then I'm going to pull that through. Okay, it's being a little bit tricky. I think it's because the threads slightly unravel, and so if you don't get the whole thread, you just get part of a thread, it's more difficult to pull through. But there we go, that's done. So like I did before, we're going to tie a little knot in with both these threads close to the stitching. I'm going to lower the foot down, pop the needle in place here, and start. So it's now going forwards and backwards like this, and when I turn it, it's going to go forwards and back. I think it's going to be okay. Right, fingers crossed. Okay, so once again cut these threads quite long and pop the knot. So back over here, just popping the other letters back into place, and I'm going to go with the L next. So kind of want that L to be a little bit inside the E there. Let's move this N out of the way and glue that onto the placemat. Right, so take that back over to the sewing machine. So we're ready to do the L. Okay, now we're going to go back over and do the N. So now we're going to do the N. This is definitely going to be the trickiest one. I think that's where I want it, so I'm going to stick that in place. And back over to the sewing machine. Okay, so we're going to do the N. This is going to be the trickiest one to do, and well, just got to go for it. Okay, so we'll go back over to the pressing mat. Okay, so that Noel, the N for the Noel wasn't too bad in the end, just going around those curves. Now we have the leaves to put on, which are going to go up here, I think. I probably won't do a blanket stitch on these. I'll probably just do a straight stitch around the edges. So I think that's where I want them to go. So I'm going to take that back over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to change the thread to a green thread. And looking at it, maybe I should have had the lettering a little bit lower. I'm wondering if there's a bit of a empty space down here. But let me get these in place first, and then I can decide what I want to do, if anything, about this space. Okay, I've changed my thread, and I'm just going to do a straight stitch around the edges of this these leaves. Okay, so back at the ironing board, just going to give this a press now. And now I'm going to trim this down, ready to put the binding on. So we need to trim this down. I want this to be 1 inch wide, so it's a little bit less than that. So I'm going to line up the stitching lines with a point on the ruler, and I'm going to just cut it straight and see what I've got. So I've now trimmed that, ready to put the binding on. I am just a little bit, think there should be something in here. So I'm going to mull over that and think what I could put in here just to balance the design on the placemat. If I was going to do it again, I might bring all the lettering down and then it would feel more balanced. So I'm just going to have a little think about what I can put here. So to provide some balance to the placemat, I looked in my ribbon stash and found this cute little Christmas ribbon with baubles and Christmas trees and stockings on it. So I am going to stitch that in the corner like so, and then I can finish the placemat off with the binding. So I've sewn that ribbon in place, and I think the placemat is now balanced with its design on the front. So we now need to bind it. So I'm going to cut some strips of this green fabric here, and they're going to be, I think I'm going to cut them at 2 1/4 inches because I want quite a narrow binding. So I'm going to cut 2 1/4 inch strips to go round the placemat. I'm going to measure that placemat to know how much I need to cut. So it is 13 1/2 one way, and it is 10 1/2 the other way. So 13 1/2 times 2 is 26, 27, and 10 1/2 times 2 is 22. 27 plus 22 is 59, so I need to probably cut a little bit extra than that. So I need to have about, I'm going to go for about 80 inches of 2 1/4 inch strips. So I've got 2 strips here that are 2 1/4 inch wide. They're about 48 inches long each. So I'm going to join these together with a mitered seam. So that means I take the 2 pieces and I cross them over like this, and then I sew down that diagonal here. So I'm just going to pop a pin in here, and I'm going to pop another pin in here. I'm going to take that to the sewing machine and sew this diagonal here. So I've still got my open toe foot on, and I'm just going to judge this by eye. You can draw a line if you want. I'm just going to, I'd forgotten I'd had it on the swung over slightly to the right there, so just having to make a slight adjustment. So now I'm going to cut a 1/4 inch seam, and I'm going to continue doing these mitered joins until I've got enough of a strip to go all the way around the placemat. So I'm going to press these mitered joins open where I can, or to one side where I've got that second line of stitching. And now I'm going to press this in half lengthways. Okay, so that's a binding strip pressed in half lengthways. Now we'll get this back here. So we need a bit of a tail at this end at the start. We're probably going to join it on the side. I think it's a good place. So we're going to start on the side. We'll join it down here, I think. And we're just going to sew down here, and then we're going to fold the fabric back like that, and then we keep sewing along this way. I will demonstrate that over at the sewing machine. So I'm going to start sewing down here. So I've changed my foot to the 1/4 inch foot, and I'll just engage the walking part of it now. So I'm ready to sew this binding on. I'm going to do a back stitch here at the pin, and then I'm going to sew down to the corner. When I get to the corner, I'm going to stop about 1/4 inch from the end of the corner, and then we'll turn the corner. So I've got to the 1/4 inch away, I've left the needle down, I'm going to raise the foot up, and now I'm going to sew off into that corner. And now I'm going to cut the threads. And now I'm going to fold the binding back so that it is 45 degrees. And then I'm going to bring the binding back again, lining the fold up, the fold here, can't see, there we go, the fold along the edge of the placemat, and then I'm going to turn the placemat round, holding everything in place. I'm then going to start sewing from the corner till I get down to the other corner. So coming to the next corner, I'm going to go down to 1/4 inch, and if I'm not sure where that is, I'll just kind of eyeball that and pop a pin in. And I'm going to come down to that pin. With the needle down, I'm going to lift the foot, and I'm going to sew off into that corner. And then I'm going to cut the threads. I'm then going to fold the binding back at a 45 degree angle, and then refold it down so that it can come down the next side of the placemat. And holding all of that in place, I'm going to turn the placemat round and then sew again down this edge. So I want to have about 8 inches, well, I'm not going to get 8 inches, about 6 inches gap here to join these ends. So I'm going to come down to about this point here. So I'm going to stop there. Right, I'm going to cut the threads, and then I'm going to show you how to join these two tails together. When I looked back at what I'd recorded for this part of the video, I could see that it wasn't very clear. So using a different quilt, I'm going to demonstrate joining the binding ends together a little more clearly, I hope. So I've gone round this quilt and sewn my binding on round the edges, and I've now got to the point here where I need to join them. So this binding has been cut at 2 1/4 inches, and we're going to have to cut one of these a little bit shorter. So I'm going to cut this one here. So I'm just going to cut here, and this one needs to lay over the top of it, and it needs to be 2 1/4 inches longer. So I've got my ruler here, and I've lined the edge of the ruler up with the edge of the one underneath, and I'm now going to measure 2 1/4 inches, and I'm going to pop a pin in it here. I'm now going to cut at that point here. So just move this out of the way, and I've got my ruler here. That's my 2 1/4 inches there, and I'm just going to cut that. So now what we need to do is another mitered join. So we have to put right sides together, and I'm just going to pop a pin in where I'm going to be sewing that mitre, which is along here. And I'm going to open it up and just see if I've got that in the right place. So that's where the seam is going to be. So yes, I believe it is in the right place. So now that I've done that, I'm going to move this pin to the corner here. And I'm going to pop another pin on the other side. And then I'm going to take that to the sewing machine and sew a mitered join along here. So I'm now going to sew this line across here to make the mitered join. It's always a little bit tricky because there's just not very much space to do it in. So we'll go back over to the cutting board and see if that's in the right place. So before I cut anything, I'm going to take the pins out and check that it's in the right place. So that's joined together like that, and this will come along like this. So yes, I'm happy that that's in the right place. And now I'm going to trim this down to 1/4 inch. I'm just going to finger press that seam now. And now I'm going to just pop a couple of pins in place along the edge. Okay. I'm going to take that back over to the sewing machine and complete the final edge piece there, closing the gap. So I'm going to start stitching where I stopped before and come back down to where I started. Okay, so that is now sewn all the way round and we're ready to complete the binding. So to finish the binding, we're going to bring it through to the front of the quilt and we're going to bring the binding through to the front to cover those edges, and then I use these binding clips to clip it into place. So with the binding clipped in place, I'm now going to go back over to the sewing machine and sew it in place. Because I'm doing it with the sewing machine, I'm going to sew it from the top, which is why I sewed the binding on the back first and have flipped it forward to the top, because I'm going to machine stitch the binding in place. So I've left the tails of my threads long so that I can tie them off nicely to finish it off, and I've got my 1/4 inch foot on the sewing machine. I'm going to lower that down and I'm going to line the edge, the inner edge of the foot up with the edge of the binding, and I'm just going to see where that needle drops. Okay, that looks looking good. So it's right on the edge of the binding here, and I'm going to sew all the way around. Okay, and so that is the placemat finished. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please click like and subscribe to my channel. Happy holidays and keep quilting!